Hello, welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to be going through homework problem number 39 on 6.3. And so we're trying to solve this system of equations using a matrix equation. So what we'll do first is we're going to write this in a matrix equation form. And if you remember how you do this is you just put in um, the coefficients of your variables in the matrix. You put the variables in their own column, x and y, and this should be equal to the answers, 4 and 0. Okay, so there is our matrix equation. And remember how we solve this is we want to move this matrix over to the other side. In other words, we want to kind of divide by it, but we can't really divide by matrices, right? We have to times by the inverse of this matrix, okay? So to do it, we need to find the inverse, okay? So we're going to find the inverse of that matrix. And remember how we do that is we put in the matrix with the identity matrix on one side of it, okay? And then we do row reduction on this to get this to be the identity matrix, right? So we want to get this to be the identity matrix. So our first step here is we want to get that this corner place, we want it to be a 1, okay? And there's several ways that you can do this. Probably the simplest way that, well, maybe not the simplest, but the most apparent way is to divide this by -3 to get rid of this so that I would just get 1. If I divided this whole row by -3, it would give me a 1 here. But if I did that, I would start getting fractions, right? And that's perfectly fine. It just gets a little messy to do. So there are other ways you could do it as well by like adding like rows up. So you could add the second row up so that you could get to a -1 and then flip the sign so you get a +1. Maybe just for simplicity, I'll go with the kind of standard option you would expect and deal with fractions. Okay, so I'm just there are other ways of doing it, but I'll just do it using fractions. So I'm going to do -1/3, and we're going to times it by row 1 to get rid of that -3 there. Okay. So what have I got when I do that? We get 1, and then -1/3 times -5 would be 5/3. Then we've got -1/3 times 1, which is just -1/3, and then 0 times -1/3 is 0. Okay. Then 2, 3, 0, and 1. Okay, so that's our new matrix that we got. Okay, so now let's get rid of this 2 down here. That's our next thing we want to do. So we're going to use that first row to get rid of that 2. So we're going to do -2 times the first row, and we're going to add it to the second row. Okay. That should get rid of that 2 there. So the first row is going to stay the same. 1, 5/3, -1/3, 0. So 1 times negative 2 is negative 2, plus 2 is 0. Negative 2 times 5/3 is negative 10/3, right? So negative 10/3, and then we're going to plus 3. So this is where life gets fun, right? So maybe just on a separate paper, if I have one. Let's just work out what that is real fast. Okay, so I was doing negative 2 times 5/3 is negative 10/3, and then we're going to be adding it to 3. Okay, so what happens when I do that? Well, we need to make a common denominator here, so I would do 10/3 plus, and then I would times this by 3 over 3, right, to make it so I get a common denominator. 3 times 3 is 9 divided by 3. Okay, so I get negative 1/3, it looks like. Okay, so right here should be negative 1/3. Negative 1/3. Okay, and then we've got here negative 2 times negative 1/3 is 2/3, and then we're going to add that to 0, so just 2/3, and then negative 2 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is still 1. Okay, so there's our matrix. Cool. So now I have a 0 here where I wanted there to be. I need a 1 here and then a 0 there. So let's start by getting the 1 there at the bottom. So to get a 1, I need to times by negative 3 to get that to be a 1. So I'll just do negative 3 times row 2. And what have we got here? We got 1, 0, 5/3, negative 1/3, and 0. Okay, the first row doesn't change, but when I do negative 3 times the second row, the 0 is still 0. The negative 1/3 becomes positive 1. 2/3 becomes, well, the 3's cancel out and just have negative 2, and then negative 3 there. Okay, so we're very close now. So all I have to do is get this to be 0. So I'm going to use this second row to get rid of this 5/3. So I'll do negative 5/3 times the second row, and we're going to add it up to the first row to cancel out that 5/3 right there. So we've got 1, 0, 1. And when we do this, when I do negative 5/3 times 1 plus 5/3, we get 0 there, which is exactly what we want to have happen. Okay. Our bottom row stays the same. So I do negative 2 times 5/3, so that's going to be 10/3. And then, so negative 2 times 5/3 is 10/3. And then we're going to be adding that positive 10/3 added to negative 1/3. Right, so we're doing 10/3 minus 1/3, which is 9/3, which is 3. Okay, so now we got that. Okay, and then we just do negative 5/3 times negative 3. That's going to be a positive number because there's two negatives. The 3's cancel out, we just get 5. Okay, so 5, and then we're going to add that up to row 1, which was 0, so 5 right there. Okay, so that's my inverse. We just figured out the inverse now. The inverse matrix was this 3, 5, -2, -3. There we go. Okay. But our goal was not to, well, we needed to find the inverse to do what we wanted to, but our goal was to solve this system of equations, right? We wanted to find out what x and y were. So we just then use that inverse matrix. I'm gonna, how to do this. I'm gonna maybe take this one away and just reference the inverse again. I'll write my inverse up here, the thing that we just found. It was 3, 5, -2, and -3. There we go. Okay. So that was the inverse that we found by doing all those row operations. So then to find out what x and y is, we just multiply both sides of this equation. So we multiply over here and over here, right, by the inverse matrix, and we will get just the inverse and the matrix will cancel out, and we will just get x and y on that side is equal to, well, the inverse matrix, 3, 5, -2, and -3, times this kind of answer matrix, the 4 and 0. Okay, so basically to find x and y, we just have to multiply these two matrices together. Okay, so remember, when you multiply matrices, you take rows of the first matrix times columns of the second. So we're going to do 3 times 4 is 12. And then 5 times 0 is 0. And then -2 times 4 is -8. Plus -3 times 0 is 0. So we've got 12 and -8. Okay, so in other words, x would be 12 and y would be -8. Okay, that would be our solution for this one. Okay, so hopefully that kind of helps you find the inverse first, and then you just multiply the inverse by this column matrix over here. Okay. Okay, well, I will see you guys in the next video.